Hey guys, welcome to the VisionaryTwins Podcast. It's a podcast about learning. And on this podcast, we share some of our profound lessons that we've learned the past 4 years. We believe mental health is a serious problem in today's world. And that's why our podcast will be engaging on self-growth conversations, ideas, and insight that we've learned from great people, including Jordan Peterson, Jay Shetty, Robin Sharma, Carl Young, Tony Robbins, David Goggins, Joe Dispenza, and many more. Welcome to our podcast. It's the learning experience, where learning is the new luxury. Thank you, guys.
It is impossible for a man to learn what he thinks he already knows. Greek Stoic philosopher Epictetus. It's a great pleasure, ladies and gentlemen, to be back again on the Visionary Twins Podcast. This podcast was actually inspired by this quote. We loved it. We believe that it actually resonates with our pre-recorded, if so to speak, podcast. The learning movement is up and running, ladies and gentlemen. Such a great pleasure. This is the Visionary Twins. And this quote really is so inspirational. We figured out that how best can we actually begin the podcast by actually giving dedication or perhaps even giving credit to the people who are trying by all means to create such empirical truth to us and actually making sure that we begin really to imagine the world differently. And this is the Greek Stoic philosopher Epictetus. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the learning movement with the Visionary Twins Podcast, where learning is the new luxury.
Of course, guys, welcome to the Visionary Twins Podcast. And today's podcast, we actually wanted to give you one of the best part of our own journey. It's a conversation that we've always wanted to have, right? We've been so excited to really want to share this podcast with you, to share these ideas with you, to share this these tips that we have, right, and how we actually got to this point in our own lives. That really helped. That really allowed us to really begin to learn and become better people. But because we talk a lot about learning, we actually thought, why not create a podcast about learning, right, to add up to much of our podcast that we're going to be talking about, but to really break down the level ground to say, can we actually talk about learning and actually get to teach someone who's listening to our podcast today that learning is the first step to actually turning your life into much of a playground than a finite game, that you become the infinite person who wants to actually keep playing the game, than versus the person who says, I'm going to play the game and it has to end. And now when it ends, what's the game? You need to go off and figure out a different game. And now you're going to be playing different games with only one life. That never adds up. So we're going to talk about learning today and give you a bit of an idea on how you can really encompass your life to a different direction, understanding how learning learning can build your life and how it actually can allow you to be able to transform your life. So of course we have several things that we want to share with you, but before we start our podcast, let us just tell you the 4 truths about learning, right? The most important things, the very distinct things that you need to understand about learning from our own personal perspective. Of course you might have had your own from whoever, right? But on our own podcast and with our own journey, we actually thought these are our 4 truths when it comes to learning. Of course, number 1, we have learning. It helps you foster a new perspective. That's one of the most important things to understand, right? The more you learn, the more you can foster in a better perspective, a better narrative, a better idea, right? You don't lean on to what you already know. That's why the thing that's standing between what you know or what you need to know, it's thinking that what you know is enough, right? So you don't need to actually base your life around that part of I know this, right? You need to be always knowing that the more I learn, the more I can guarantee myself of a new perspective. Of course, the next one is leveling the ground. The more you learn, the more you level the ground. You don't want to live or you don't want to walk on a path or on a ground that's imbalanced, that's not leveled, right? That does not actually assure you of something, that's so clear that your steps can be actually, that you can step on the ground on a much more, on a better way, on a better scale than to feel like one foot is on top of the other and all that, right? The more you learn, the more you level the playing ground. And the 4th truth, the 3rd truth is learning expands your world. The more you learn, the more you recognize that the world is such a very huge place. You don't live on a third part of the world. You live in an infinite world. You don't live in a world where there's walls and buildings and cars and everything. You live in a world where there's an ocean. It grows bigger every day. The more you learn, you recognize that you don't know anything. I think that's the most greatest part about really learning. And the fourth truth is that learning triggers awareness. It triggers extreme awareness. The more you understand this, the more you can actually want to go out and read and learn and actually, induct yourself into a much more progressive way of living by actually learning. It expands, it triggers, it unlocks awareness. You become literally aware of what's happening in the world, and you become a curious person enough to want to go out and learn and realize that what you know is not enough. Right, guys? So those are the four truths that we know about learning from our own personal experience. What do you think?
Absolutely, I could not really disagree with what you're saying, because those are the things that we have fostered within our life for the past 4 years, and it takes so much experience to be able to come to a point where you realize such a thing. And the first question that we might truly want to ask ourselves as a factor that has contributed immensely in terms of our personal growth is that we have to understand how best can we define learning. Because as far as there are different definitions of success, and it's always important to figure out the best one that will eventually suit you. That's what I had to believe about the world. It actually allows you the opportunity to then throw yourself into the dungeon and figure out that which will be best for you to understand, and that will eventually resonate with the higher version of yourself, or the better version that you aspire to be. So as much as people have given the different definitions of success, that some people are driven by money, some people think that success is having money, some people have different definitions to success, and many young people do not know. They tend to consume other people's. It's not a problem that you actually consume other people's definition of success, but now we have to then look into learning. It's an adventure for you as a young person. What is learning? I had to believe. I learned this like 2 years ago when I think I was 20. I was 20 years of age, and I learned the art of the definition of learning as to be when you're in a road and you're traveling to and whatever place that you actually are traveling to, and then maybe you are concerned about the road condition to where you're heading. Now you want to figure out exactly what's happening at the place where you're heading to. Now the question would be, are you going to ask the person whom you are heading to that particular direction, or are you going to ask the person who is from the direction? If you're smart enough and if you think this is a cool question, you obviously would suggest that you can ask the person who is from that direction. So that's learning. Learning, it's really allowing yourself the outlet to put yourself in a place where you know that you don't know where you are heading. You don't know the conditions to where you're heading. You don't know what's yet to happen. Now, the best thing that you do is then to evolve your world and actually ask yourself, how best can I ask the person? How best can I swallow my pride, swallow my ego, and then ask other people, the people who you are heading to, or the people who you are aspiring to, how best is the journey to which you are heading to? That's learning for me. It's exposing yourself in other people's world. It's exposing yourself to other people's world, which includes their teachings, their methodologies, and their way of living. And that allows you the outlet to then open out to your own world. That's what I truly believe to be learning. That's why the great Greek Stoic philosopher believes that it is impossible for a man to learn what he thinks he already knows. So now when you don't know what you know, then this opens you out to learning. Because then now you understand that you don't know anything. You're just a person who just enters a journey, and then you just want to try it out. That's the art of learning. It allows you to portray yourself as a person who knows nothing. But if you don't have the courage to actually allow yourself to say, I do not know, you cannot foster learning. You cannot venture into learning. You cannot foster a new perspective. You cannot even level the ground. You cannot even expand your world, because you expand your world by actually allowing yourself the outlet to tap into other people's world and then understand how to level the ground for yourself. And that allows you to open out to your own personal learning experience. That's what I believe to be learning. So for you, what is learning?
Well, I believe that I actually love how you actually explain learning on your own terms. It actually makes sense. It resonates with me, and I guess I could also want to deploy that perspective that if I'm walking towards a place and I don't know where that place is, the best way to know the place is to ask someone who's already been there.
Absolutely.
I think that's a very positive conjunction over there. And I think the other thing that I would really want to touch bases on, especially my idea on learning, and I think to me learning has been about really understanding that we share experiences. Learning is a shared experience. We can all go through certain things. Like I've never seen someone going through a unique thing in life. I've never seen someone going through a unique thing in life. There's no unique experience. We all go through the same thing. It's not the same thing in a much more contextualized way to say my parents died when I was 8 and all that, but there's death of someone else who lost her or his parents.
Absolutely.
Or something like that, right? And we share shared experiences. The best way it's that you learn to understand that all these shared experiences, they all have something to teach, right?
Yeah.
And now I was listening to Jordan Peterson. He's just a great guy. I love the guy. He's been my mentor for some time now. And he said that the purpose of memory, he argues that the purpose of memory is not to remember the past. In fact, he says that the purpose of memory, it is to extract knowledge from the past, to build a better future. It is to get an idea of what happened in the past. So right, there are things that used to happen back in the ages that still happen today. So we share those experiences. We just need to go out back there and just say, what can I learn? What can I embody? What can I, try to work on, right? Those learnings, they really do create a better perspective about life, Yeah. So that is learning to me. It is really looking down on someone else's experiences and really learning to understand that we share those experiences, and we actually need to level the ground by understanding that we can learn something. So of course, I think the next question should be something like, what have you discovered about the art of learning? Because I feel like there are ample of things that really do bring out this art of learning. What have you discovered?
Well, as complex as the question is, but I don't think it's gonna actually overpower what I've actually learned. It's a very complex question, because this allows you to take a deep look at your own personal discoveries about learning. I think one thing that I've actually discovered about learning, as I said to you, and I've learned this thing when I was still trying to deploy that sense of learning in my life. I had to discover that learning, it's like walking a mile in other people's shoes. It's like I always say, we are half the experience of other people, meaning that when you are half the experience of other people, you begin to learn that you are not alone in this journey.
Yeah.
That is the thing about learning. When you expose yourself to other people's world, you begin to understand that you're actually not alone. We as young people, we are consumed to that which is happening to us, and we begin to create this imaginary world that other people are not going through the same thing that we're going through. We are tied up to that space in our life that keeps us afar from the understanding that we are half the experience of other people, meaning that which is ultimately happening to us happens 10 times difficult for other people. That which I'm not trying to make you feel like that which you're going through is nothing, But I'm trying to understand. I'm trying to put you in a position to understand that we are half the experience of other people. Whatever that what's happening to you on a 60% level is actually 90% even extremely harder to other people. Meaning that this is gratitude. It's understanding that you're not alone in this journey. People have had it all difficult than you actually think that you've had. Now that's what learning does to you. It opens you out to it opens you out to gratitude. Having to build the understanding of that which you're going through and saying, I'm not alone in this journey. Some people have had the hardest part of their life. Some people have the hardest experience of their life. So that's what I had to believe about learning. That's what I've discovered about learning. It just makes you realize that whatever that you're going through, it might be difficult, but other people have had the difficult part of their life. And if you cannot really learn yourself out from that which you're experiencing, it's going to be hard for you to kill your ego and say, okay, whatever that I'm going through, it's part of life. It's part of the experience. It's part of growing. It's part of expanding myself. It's part of discovering the part of me that can actually understand. You build an understanding when you learn. You discover that understanding is so pivotal. So you cannot underestimate that. It's so profound. And people and young people do not know that because they do not know that. But it's you through the process, you learn that. You learn it by reading. You learn it by reading other people's stories. You learn it by exposing yourself to other people's stories. And then you get to understand that, okay, fine, which means I'm not alone. There are people who talk about their stories, people who talk about their experiences. It makes you even much better than people who can't talk about their own problems. So expose yourself to other people's world. That's what I've discovered about learning. We are half the experience of other people. That which you're going through, it's 10 times harder than people. It is 10 times harder than in other people's life than you actually think than you actually think on your personal life you do experience.
Well, it makes total sense. It makes total sense, and I'd really want to advocate that to a higher degree, right? To say that there's some sort of discovery out of learning, and that's art, right?
Yeah.
Because you get to really understand from a very deeper level, not from a subtle level, not from a surface level, that you just have to go through things and not learn, right? What makes life interesting, what makes learning interesting is that it is not it's not a closed thing, right? You just have to consciously look at things that could... learning is not a path of certain people, right? It's art. You can go and dispose yourself towards it, right? It's not a closed thing to say, okay, fine, no, learning is for certain people, not for certain people. No, it's just about loving learning and making it art and making it a part of your life. That's why I truly believe that the art of learning we've been fed this lie that only learning is about really looking for things to absorb and all that. But I've learned that learning is an experience. It's a beautiful experience. It's not we've had people who say we had to learn certain things the hard way and all that. And I don't think we should be tolerating that. We should not be believing that we should learn things the hard way, the hard way, and that should be learning. I feel like learning, it should be art. It should be a very beautiful thing. We should be able to really drive ourselves towards it, to really want to be driven into it, to want to be attracted to it, to want to be interested in learning. It should not be a parallel decision that you have to take under very terrific, circumstances. And you say, I have to fucking learn. And that doesn't really make the part. So I feel like the next question should be, is learning more about consuming ideas, or really there's something that leads to learning? Because I feel like it's very important to understand that if we learn, is there any path that learning, drives us to? Or is it just the consuming of ideas that we find ourselves in? Is there a certain path that we venture into as we learn? And I think to answer that question, I would say, of course, there's a destination of learning. There's a destination where if you learn, you get driven towards, right? And that one could be liberation. People who read, man, I could tell you something, they are not slaves. They don't feel like the world is against them. They feel like they're part of the evolution. They're part of growing. They're part of this infinite growing world. They don't feel like when something outside happens that contradicts who they are. When something happens that means, oh fuck, everything's happening to me. No. When you are learning, there's something that leads you to. It leads you to understanding yourself, understanding the world, and really gaining perspective, and really not being attached to anything, and really not being ignorant about anything. You become free of every experience. You are not captive of anything, but you are very limitless. That's why people who read can often control the world. They have a better perspective. They have an opinion. They have an idea that's lying beyond invincible world, that's lying beyond invincible faces, I must say, right? So I think that's the best part about really learning. It leads to that. What does learning, what do you think?
Well, learning, as you said, I would say 30% or 40% about it is actually consuming ideas. But what I had to learn is that learning drives you or leads you to the other side of you that you never thought actually existed. You know, that's what I believe learning. It leads you to a place that you never thought actually does exist. It paints a picture for you that if you can take that picture can ultimately create that sense of wealth within yourself, because there's wealth in learning. It's not material, it's not material, it's not money driven, but it's just that sense of peace, happiness. That's what learning does. It takes you to a point where you become happy with yourself. You become happy with what happens to you. You develop a sense of happiness in your life with your circumstances. You build a clear understanding of your circumstances. You build a companionship with your experiences. You tend to make love with what you're going through. You tend to make love with what you're actually experiencing without actually putting it hard on yourself, making it look like it's actually difficult. So that's what I believe learning. It's a process. It leads you to somewhere. It does not put you in that particular, you learn something today and then that's it. It gets you closer to the version of you that can ultimately make a difference, that can ultimately inspire someone, that can ultimately make a difference in someone else's life. It's a progression state, So let's say, can learning cure mental disorders? Can learning really cure mental disorders? Can learning reduce suffering? Can learning eradicate suffering in totality? That's the question. It's very pivotal because it actually played a very fundamental role in our life. Can learning cure mental disorders? Some people might ask, what kind of mental disorders? Negative self-talk can be one, overthinking, self-doubt, anxiety and depression. You can name them. There are so many mental disorders. But how can learning actually cure? Not entirely cure, because learning is it's like 60% of the mastery equation, and then there's 40% that you ultimately need to put into action to can be able to do all those things or overcome all those things. We can actually talk to people about the learning process and everything, but it talks about the execution. That's the thing about it. And then that's exactly what I believe. We were arguing the other time about Maxwell not believing that experience is the best teacher. And I do not believe that to be true as well, because I believe that evaluated experience is the best teacher, something like that. So it's the same thing. We're not trying to cure something. We're trying to identify things that can ultimately help reduce, that amount of suffering, that amount of pain, in your life when it comes to mental disorders. So the question is, let's not mention the word cure precisely, but let's say, can it actually reduce suffering or mental disorders?
Well, I think the most important thing to understand on that idea, on this question exactly, is that learning can cure mental disorders, because it fosters, it gives you this idea that there's something like that. The more you learn, the more you realize that, okay, fine, there's something like negative self-talk. So now there's empirical evidence that shows that people are like grinding through negative self-talk because of 1, 2, 3. And I think that makes it fair. It makes it fair enough because you become exposed to the level of information and ideas that really allows you to think beyond your own circumstances. Because I feel like the mental disorders that we talk about, negative self-talk, overthinking, self-doubt, those are experiences, right? Those are moments, right? People are not born self-doubting themselves. They are not born overthinkers. They are not born with this negative self-talk. It's just things that we inherent as we grow, right? So we can unlearn that by literally learning, right? So if you are in that position in your life where you feel like you have this very humongous negative self-talk, you have this very incomparable self-talk or overthinking level or self-doubt, it's mainly because you've started learning that. The only thing that's very pretty simple, it's that you start unlearning that process. How do you unlearn that process? You keep learning from really distinctive experiences, distinctive sources that allows you to say, okay, fine, because I've been through this. Those are traumatic experiences that most people talk about. They go through all that, and the way to do it, it's that one, you could maybe engage on things that you've never done before. Two, it could be that you start doing the things that you're mostly pretty much scared of, right? If you were having very dark days in your life where you have to negatively talk to yourself, you can engage in positive conversation. You go out and have positive conversation with other people, and that gives you a very different perspective. And the part about self-doubt, it's pretty much simple. You devote yourself to really saying, what can I do that I've been very scared of doing, and that could really allow me to get a bit of a different angle from looking at myself. I think that really adds up.
I love how you have actually narrated this thing. It's so profound. It's so profound to a point where it makes me remember a quote that I had from the author of The Alchemist. I think you know the guy.
Yeah.
He wrote a quote, and this thing stuck in my mind a lot when it comes to the art of learning, and I think that was super powerful. He said that maybe the journey sometimes is not about learning anything, but unlearning everything we are not. That's so profound.
That's so
It's
profound.
so thought-provoking, because this thing allows you to understand that unlearning is still learning. You know, just by going through the process of unlearning that which was actually taught to you, or that which you actually experienced that became a torture to you, that's still a process of learning. So people think that learning, like we said, it's about consuming and consuming and consuming. But sometimes it's about unlearning. That's still part of learning. Unlearning the things that you thought you were. Unlearning the truth that was set to operate your life. Unlearning the behaviors. Unlearning the attitude. Unlearning the circumstances that pretty much have got you in a point where you ultimately feel like you are lost in life. So it's like you said, it's learning can be cured or can be reduced by putting ourselves in a position where we try to unlearn some factors that are contributing to the negative self-talk, to the overthinking and self-doubt. Because there's ultimately a prerequisite for such negative talk and overthinking and self-doubt. There's a prerequisite. And maybe it might be the experiences or the circumstances or the trauma experiences or the traumatic experience that you as a young person have actually went through. It's like you said, it's understandable. We cannot downgrade the fact that it's part of life. Everybody goes through some shit in their life, and it's normal for people to go through that. Okay, it's part of everyone else's piece of cake, if I would say. So I think it's the part of unlearning. It's important to stop. Sometimes you gotta have to stop and unlearn. Unlearn whatever that we have actually encountered. So the question that we would love to really close the conversation with as we wrap up is that, can learning accelerate transformation? Can learning, or can conscious learning, if so to speak, can conscious learning accelerate transformation? Conscious learning. That's so profound.
Well, I think it's a pretty much good question. I think it's very relevant to today's world, where there's so much information. There's really so much. There are tons of sources about whatsoever that you're looking for, whether it's on YouTube, whether it's on Amazon, whether it's, I don't care what is it, but there's tons of information. And the most important part, it's that we should be conscious of what we are learning, right? So I don't feel like, I was reading a book, I think it was a while ago, Think Before It's Too Late. I forgot who the author is. And in that book, he says, the human mind is so smart. It can learn almost everything, but you don't need to learn everything. I think that was the best part that I really learned from that book, that you only have a limited amount of time in this world.
Yes.
Why want to learn everything, right? And the tragedy to that could be learning things that really is very unnecessary, that really contradicts who you are, that really does not foster in a better perspective about who you do. Why learn the opposite? Why learn the unnecessities, the things that do not really matter in your life? So I think conscious learning is the ability to become picky and very conscious on what you're learning, right? To say, I want to learn about spirituality, I don't want to learn about politics, right? That balance really adds up. I wouldn't say that people should not learn about politics, but try to learn things that really are in harmony with who you are, right? I wouldn't say people, again, should not expose themselves to different information, but I would say that if you want to accelerate transformation, the best way to do it is to consciously learn the things that advocates who you are, that really shows who you are, that allows you to embody that and not feel like that's contradictory to who you are. So I feel like really allowing people, allowing yourself, allowing people the outlet next to you to really consciously learn from experiences, from very important sources, very important people, that really accelerates transformation. You're not going to learn things on your own, but you're going to have to go out there and really get to expose yourself to things that can really accelerate the transformation that we all need to really embark on, right? I think that would really add up to our conversation, man. Thank you so much for really becoming a part of this conversation, and we hope that we actually got a piece of what we've talked about today.
Absolutely. That's how we get to wrap up our second episode. And we're so happy and so excited that we ultimately got to a point where we talk about such a deeply rooted conversations that really appeal to us as young people, that really have a dot in the part of us that can ultimately want to really become better. So that was the urgent call for exploration. One thing that ultimately need to be explored, one thing that us as young people need to really explore. What we need within our society is that kind of exploration where we get to really learn about some stuff that really matter. So this is our second episode, and just know that each and every morning we try to shoot each and every morning on Tuesdays and around the week. In fact, in the morning, most important, we love shooting our podcast and actually enjoying ourselves and talking about things that really matter. So tune in to our third episode. The sooner the better it is for you and for us. So this is the learning movement of Visionary Twins, where learning is the new luxury. Stay tuned for third episode of the Visionary Twins. We're so happy. Thank you so much.